we felt we had a responsibility to our community to share these stories and do it in an appropriate and accessible and a careful way. I also can see that what they gave us was this most incredible asset as an organisation that you can just keep putting out. It is timeless in terms of the stories, and people to this day keep finding it.
These are stories about personal people's lives and how we've identified from the 70s, 80s and 90s to now as queer people. And so we had to get our head around, well, how do we take care of those people's identities while also staying true to the historical context? And a podcast is great for that, by the way, because you just have lots of space and time to do it.
So it's not like it's going to change the world overnight, but it really gives you something it's given us something we never had before, and it just keeps giving. And I think that's probably the big thing of it for me.
Hey, this is Rob. Welcome back to the Fundraising Bright Spots podcast. This is episode 158. And this is the show for fundraisers who want ideas and maybe a little dose of inspiration to help you raise more money and really enjoy your job. This time, we're looking at podcasting as a way of helping your charity further its mission. Recently, I got the chance to talk to Stephanie Fuller, CEO of the charity Switchboard, and Adam Zmith from the production company Aunt Nell. Switchboard and Aunt Nell have collaborated to create a fascinating, award-winning podcast called The Logbooks, and it's now completed 3 successful seasons. Not only is it a brilliant listen, it's also proved an incredibly effective way of engaging and inspiring their community. This is such an interesting story for anyone looking for creative ways to add value to their community. I hope you enjoy it. Hello, Stephanie. Welcome to the podcast.
Hiya, Rob. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. Hello, Adam. Welcome.
Hello, Rob. Thanks for having me. And hi, Steph. Nice to see you again.
Hi, Adam. Always good to see you.
And so, yes, you guys know each other pretty well by now after this journey. So that our listeners can tune into it, a few months ago, went to the podcast show in London and was very excited to go to lots of interesting talks about the business of podcasting. The one that most inspired me, honestly, I enjoyed most and I learned most, was a talk that you did about a podcast you've created, in particular for Switchboard, the charity of which Steph is the CEO. Just before we get into that whole interesting story, which I hope will inspire some of our listeners to look again at maybe a similar tactic, could we just tune in? So, Steph, you're experienced in the charity sector. I know you have held various roles in fundraising and as a fundraising director. And now that you're the CEO of Switchboard, could you just give a top line kind of help us tune into your journey so far, and then also about Switchboard?
Well, I started out actually working for a hospice as a community fundraiser, which I actually think is the best place that all fundraisers should start, frankly, is community fundraising, because you learn so much about, the things that people really care about and the kind of grassroots significance to any charity, and actually how if you don't really look after that part of your community, I think you're always kind of, you're risking trouble coming to your door, is what I would say from that. And so that's where I started out. And as you say, I've held different roles across the years at different types of non-profit organizations. And now the present day, here I am at Switchboard as CEO. And I've been here 3.5 years now, which seems to have gone like so quick. I came in when we were 46 and a bit years old. So people listening, doing the maths, would think, well, they must be nearly 50 now, and they'd be right, because we were 50 this year. And so not only have we had this huge milestone of celebration and also reflection about the journey that this charity's been on over 50 years, but also we've navigated a period of the pandemic in amongst this as well, which threw us challenges that we never really thought we'd encounter, and strangely opened up new opportunities for us that we haven't looked back from either. So it's been a really interesting time to be in an organisation such as Switchboard, one that I care deeply about. It's an organisation that supports the LGBTQIA plus community and has done now for 50 years by providing a safe space for people to call us and talk about anything that might be worrying them. And our service operates 10 a.m. to 10 p.m, 365 across telephone, instant message and email. and it's staffed by our trained volunteers, and we have around 300 of those at the moment who make the service what it is. And we are a community within our own community as well, which I think is one of the things that's special about Switchboard. But especially significant is when we started and the journey that sent us on, which is 1974 to the present day, and how the rights of LGBTQIA plus people have changed in that period. And Switchboard has almost been like the listening ear to that. And so this will lead us to the next part of your question, I'm sure. It provided us with an opportunity, which I'm sure is something you want to ask about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a particular reason why this whole project is so interesting, and it makes sense that it was done. Certainly one of the reasons. And Adam, you're a professional podcaster, among other things, and your company is Aunt Nell. Could you tell us a tiny bit about what you do, and in particular what Aunt Nell focuses on?
Yeah, Aunt Nell is a podcast production company, which is primarily me and a person called Tash Walker. And we are a podcast company that's really focused on making podcasts, timeless podcasts, we call them, that are popping with improbable connections and untold stories. And we make podcasts generally in partnership with other organizations. Most of them have been charities, including Switchboard. And we've also worked with those charities and our partner organizations to get funding to make the kinds of podcasts that we want to make, which tend to be documentary series using archives and lots of interviews. So they're quite kind of in-depth, quite deep care documentary series. And we founded the company Aunt Nell actually after having made a podcast series like that, which was called The Logbooks. And that was the first one that we made, and it was made in partnership with Switchboard.
Yes, and I've really enjoyed listening to various episodes from different series that you've done. I see why it's won awards. I see why it's so valuable to Switchboard. But before we get into what it is and how it works and what my listeners might take from it, in terms of the context for why it happened in the first place, I'm guessing Switchboard, like most other charities of similar size, Steph, isn't awash with resources. It can be often hard to decide what to focus energy on. What were the key factors that caused you or colleagues to decide to have a go?
Yeah, so I think there's a collision of things that happen here really to bring this to life in this moment. And I think one of the significant things is that, as I mentioned, from 1974 when we started, obviously on our first day, 45 people called Switchboard. And from that first day, handwritten logbooks were kept from 74 right the way through to 2003. And they hold this incredible rich history of why people wanted to talk to Switchboard and what sort of things might have been concerning them and what the community was experiencing at the time, and also how our volunteers were experiencing that as well. And so Tash, who Adam mentioned a little bit earlier, who's obviously part of Aunt Nell, is also a Switchboard volunteer. And Tash was one of the people that came across the logbooks at Switchboard up in the lofts and said, look, these are incredible. What do you think we should do with them? And obviously, one thought is, of course, archive them and make sure they're safely protected and there for others to view in the future. But actually, the bigger thing is, how do you tell the story of that? How do you meaningfully bring that to life? And you're right, we don't have a ton of resources. We're not awash with that. We're a listening service for our community. As I'm recording this now, volunteers are on shift, taking calls from people that need support. And that's our day job. That's what we do. So we really needed somebody probably to see the opportunity a little bit for us, if I'm honest. And I think we had the story already. We just didn't know how to tell it and how to kind of get it out into the world in a really available way, in a way that could reach multiple people wherever they are, and also in a meaningful way. And so I think what then happened is that Tash obviously recognized the opportunity of the logbooks, and along with Adam and a third person, Shiv, the three of them came together to say, there's an incredible story of our history, and these are untold stories. And to pick up on a word that Adam used, care. We care about this. If you would trust us to tell this story, we think we could really tell it in the right way. And having somebody who's already a Switchboard volunteer obviously gives you a degree of security around that, in terms of you can confidently believe that they're going to do the right things. I think Tash was a trustee at that time as well. And so the viability of funding them became the next part of that, really. And, it was a heritage grant that made that possible for the funding to come into place. And then the logbooks went into production. But of course, from our point of view, you're then thinking, well, what are the benefits of this? Why would you do it? Why put yourself through the time and trouble if there isn't a lot of other things you could be doing instead? And there are loads of other things I could literally be doing. And actually, I was able to do most of those loads of other things because the podcast itself, for me, was quite low friction, really. Actually, the team did the work on that. What it really gave us was, we felt we had a responsibility to our community to share these stories and do it in an appropriate and accessible and a careful way. I also can see that what they gave us was this most incredible asset as an organization that you can just keep putting out. It is timeless in terms of the stories, and people to this day keep finding it. And then, contacting Switchboard about saying, I've just found this, it's amazing. So that it's really useful in that setting. I'm sure we'll talk about donations and things like that in a while because it's a fundraising podcast. But even today, and this is genuinely true, I've been on a meeting earlier today, and somebody that was at the meeting with said, one of my friends was at a talk that you did, and at the end of it, you said, if you want to know more about the history of Switchboard, listen to the logbooks. So they've listened to the logbooks, and now they've registered to become a volunteer. Now, Adam, that's happened several times, that journey. No, it really
great.
has. Of people finding it that way. And of course, the other thing is for me is that, we're a small team. Pride Month's a really busy month for us. I get invited to talk a lot, and I want to talk about lots of different things to do with our community, the history, what's happening right now. And there's a lot happening right now, regrettably. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of it, I can never really give people enough, but what I can give them is the Logbooks podcast. And so that then goes out in all my follow-up notes to people and stuff like that. And I know then that is going to be picked up and people do listen to it. Because I know then weeks later, I'll get like an email from somebody who said, by the way, you did this talk at our company. That was amazing. I really loved it. I've signed up to a direct debit. We just think what you do is amazing. It's that kind of thing so it's not like a huge burst into flames project and it's going to change the world overnight, but it really gives you something it's given us something we never had before. And it just keeps giving. And I think that's probably the big thing of it for me.
That's great to hear from my side as a producer, because it's really nice to know that you can make a piece of work that has this effect. And hopefully for every one email that you get, Steph, there's someone else who's also listened but just hasn't emailed, so you don't know these things. But I like to think of using the medium of podcasts to reach lots of people, because it is such this intimate experience.
I do find it so inspiring because, for one thing, every episode that exists is at its heart helping fulfill the mission. And they may never email, but at some level maybe they felt less alone, or they understood something better, or they decided to talk to someone. And then clearly, some of them are more likely to take a deep breath and pick up the phone to you. So that's directly achieving the mission. I loved what you said when you did your talk at the podcast show the other day, was how many of them are like that person you mentioned just there, who maybe they first heard about Switchboard via the podcast, or even if they didn't, before kind of deciding to put their hand up and offer to volunteer, they had listened to some. And if, so many charities are struggling to find volunteers, and just the human power of fulfilling their mission, which at the heart of it, so much of what you do is the ability to pick up the phone and listen and connect. If every episode that gets created is ticking both those boxes, I think it's such a brilliant way. And we haven't even talked about the fact that it might cause a bit more funding to come in as well.
Can I just add something there, Rob? Yes, the charity has its own mission, but we as producers also have to have our mission. And it's not at odds, but it is separate. And we have to be able to have our own decisions, which is editorial, production decisions. You can very easily make a bad podcast. Yeah. I suppose this is one way of saying it. You can very easily make a bad podcast if you're just concerned with protecting an organization's image and promoting an organization. No matter how good its archive, no matter how good its stories, and no matter how important its service, if you're just concerned with that, you can make a bad podcast.
No, I think you're right. And I think another thing actually, which has occurred to me, even since we've been talking, that, one of the challenges, to say for us as a charity, is actually storytelling in some respects, because the way the service operates is it's confidential, non-judgmental, and non-directive. So, last year we handled 15,000 conversations. We don't really know what happens next in almost all of those conversations because they're confidential. And so going back into the history enables us to really substantiate the storytelling aspect of our service through those logbooks, and in a way that is quite personal to the listener. So you're very much just with the logbooks when you're the listener. And I think that's something which I think for a lot of charities is actually quite difficult to do.
Hey there, this is Rob, and I wanted to quickly let you know about our 2 long-standing courses designed to help you grow high-value fundraising results. That's the Major Gifts Mastery Programme and the Corporate Mastery Programme, which are starting again from October 2024. Of course, I could tell you all about them myself, but it might be more interesting for you to hear from someone who's experienced one of these courses. So here's some feedback we received recently from Naomi Campbell from a charity called Fields of Life, who took part in the most recent Major Gifts Mastery Programme.
It was amazing. I've worked now in the charity sector for about 8 years, and it's the best training that I've done in my time working in the sector. I think for me personally, it was about having the confidence and the techniques that you taught so practically and interactively and in such a fun way to really build my own confidence. I think I've noticed a huge shift in my own mindset when it comes to fundraising and working with major donors that has just allowed me to enjoy my job so much more, really. Trust fundraising can feel quite lonely at times, so to have that camaraderie, that group of people who are just willing you well, that you can learn from each other, safe space to bounce ideas off each other, and then leave the room feeling more inspired, more determined, more encouraged to do the best job you can. I think tons of value in that for me.
To find out more about either Corporate Mastery or the Major Gifts Mastery Programme, go to brightspotfundraising.co.uk/services.
For many charities, it's extremely hard to build a closer relationship with the people who care about this cause or share these values. It's really hard, and everything, we risk it becoming more transactional. So there just is, and I feel this way anyway because I've been playing with podcasting for several years now, but there just is something different about the medium of podcasting which can help create some deeper connection rather than the surface level way of doing things. Here, the medium is podcasting. It's really similar to lots of other enlightened approaches to a charity, not just asking and seeking resources, but caring deeply about their community. And I love how well you've done this. I guess one question I've got, holding those stories as precious and doing absolutely right by people, or other ethical considerations. Adam, do you want to give us your take on how you've done your best to do that and indeed maybe learned along the way?
Yeah, well, we had to first of all recognize exactly what the archive was and what the actual logbooks were and what they meant really to Switchboard and, well, to all of us, and especially to, I guess, the LGBTQ plus community, which Tash and I are members of. So Tash had already spent like about 3 years reading through all the logbooks, and then I had to take my time to read through them all as well, which I needed to do as a producer because I needed to know the content. But I also think that was a process of me getting into the head of like, how do we take care of these things? Because you can see as you read them, like how valuable they are and how important they are. And then also it was me getting up to speed via Tash primarily about what Switchboard is and how important confidentiality is and how important anonymity is. That's like a foundation of the service. And, you know, I had to like really properly appreciate that. And then it was a question of thinking, okay, well, how do we do this? How do we get these stories into a podcast whilst respecting those things? And it was a mixture of things. It was just thinking about everything from what's really quite basic, like changing names and identifying details from the callers as the notes are written in the logbooks. By the way, although they're in an archive, not anyone can go and have a look at them. You have to be approved by Switchboard to go and have a look at them. Also, my background as a journalist helps with that in terms of thinking, like knowing a bit about laws and regulations around the media about how you identify or don't identify sources and things like that. So that's useful. And then I suppose there's the sort of more complicated, smooshier stuff of just like, well, these are stories about people's lives and how we've identified from the 70s, 80s and 90s to now as queer people. Even that word queer wouldn't have been used by someone like me in the way that I'm using it now in previous times. And some people today don't like to use it. I personally do. So knowing about those things and knowing about right now we're in a hot period of focus around trans people and the politics around that, and the language around that has been changing, and it was different in the 70s and 80s. And so we had to get our head around, well, how do we take care of those people's identities while also staying true to the historical context? And a podcast is great for that, by the way, because you just have lots of space and time to do it. And that's one of the reasons why the form is really, really good for telling like complicated stories, which have a social and political weight to them. And then also just knowing our history.
That reminds me of something in your talk the other day. And I think it was your opposite number who was at the charity inquest. And it really struck me right at the start. She said, actually, for any large charity, this is true to an extent, but especially for smaller charities, getting PR is almost impossible nowadays. Mm-hmm. And just occasionally, your issue or cause might happen to be the flavour of the month on the mainstream media's news desk. But for the rest of the year, like very few of the established media, the newspapers and so on, are interested, however beautifully you craft your PR, your press release. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. she said one of the great things for Inquest as a relatively small organisation is that we don't need someone else to think our topic is currently flavour of the month. Like it's having our own channel, and we might need a little resource to sort of promote it. But if there are people, however niche, who care about our cause, we can find them and we can tell our stories to people who could care. And I thought that's so interesting compared to 10 or 20 years ago, where even small organizations didn't have this opportunity to sort of proactively make things happen. There's one other key thing that definitely was on my list to ask you about, Steph. You've touched on it already, how you got it funded, because many charities might be thinking, well, how on earth would we find the budget for this?
Yeah, so it's funded through a grant. So Lottery Heritage Grant was the route that achieved kind of revenue for it. That's a question just following a process ultimately, and then hoping to be successful, which fortunately Switchboard were. So that aspect of it feels relatively straightforward. I think where it leads next, actually, in terms of the revenue generation, is if we were to talk again in a year's time, I reckon I'd have more stories. And if you talk again a year after that, I think I'll have some more stories. And I think that is the story of this in many respects, is that it reaches people in different ways, and you never quite know when it's going to hit and when it's going to land. We have had people donate and just say, send a donation. I listened to the Logbooks podcast. I just think it's fantastic what you're doing, that you're still doing it. And I just wanted to sign up to a regular donation. And you get those kind of activations. And I think having something that's bespoke to you is incredibly powerful. And that probably cuts across other mediums as well. But when you can communicate in a way that feels personal, but also in a kind of bite-sized, in a consumable way as well. I think that's the other thing, isn't it? Often charities, when they're sort of trying to, I think you alluded to it earlier, they're trying to raise funds and they just go straight in with the need, and like, this is, we need this because of X, and there's not a lot of storytelling around it. You haven't given people the chance to kind of get to know the organization and get under the skin of it and what have you. And I think, people becoming more and more considered, and particularly individual donors, where they want to put their money, and they want to know more about the organization and the provenance of it and many other things as well. And this product, the logbooks as a product, and I hate calling it that because it feels so much more than that, enables us to go one-on-one with a prospective donor at their pace. and for them to listen to the stories of Switchboard and to kind of go on that journey with us. And if they've gone on that journey with us, they are very likely to consider us to be an organisation worthy of their time and probably worthy of their donation as well. And I think there's something about longevity here as well, about being able to put something out into the world, and it has longevity. And I think that that's another aspect of this that didn't really think about at the start, probably thought, oh, well, maybe we'll see a rush of things and stuff like that. But actually, it's the longevity that matters.
Yeah, really good points. And the other thing that occurs to me, and I don't have an example, but it just seems to me that there's another route that a charity could go down, which is to find, and different charities do or don't have many major donors, wealthier people who support them. But if there were wealthier donors for another organization and you have a good rapport with them and share as a charity what your challenges are, and you've got a clear plan of how a podcast might make a big difference, I think for a certain kind of donor, it would be really exciting as a more entrepreneurial type or someone who anyway is interested in this kind of media if there was a major donor who had been enjoying funding the creation of this amazing art over these last years.
It's fun to be involved in making something and supporting something, and supporting, I hope, independent creative people that like to make stuff, Yeah.
Couple of things I wanted to ask you, Adam. One is that you have a couple of different ways of working with charities. With Switchboard, as I understand it, you're very hands-on, and with some others, you're one step removed. You do some of it, but also you help the organisation if there just is less resource or less funding, help them do more of the doing if that's based on their situation. So that's one thing I was wondering.
So the model with Switchboard was that we were in charge of making it in partnership with them, guided by them, lots of communication back and forth, but we were in charge of making it and the money came to us. Well, we got the money together, but the money came to us. And we're doing the same now with the Pink Singers, which is a 40-year-old LGBTQ plus choir. We worked with them to get some funding for what was also a heritage project, actually, because it's pertaining to their archive and their history. And then the money for the podcast came to us, and now we are making it as a production company, again, in partnership with them. The other model that you're talking about is Inquest is a good example of, they actually came to us and said, like, hey, we love what you've done with the logbooks. Can we have a chat about how we could do something similar? Because we've got really, really important archive. So we talked to them and we realized that there were like a couple of different ways in. One was Switchboard model, but actually it looked like they were not going to have enough money to do that or be able to find enough money to do that. Plus, also, they had their own reasons to want to make the podcast themselves and learn. They wanted to develop those skills in-house. So we came up with a model with them, which meant that they hired me and Tash as consulting producers on a podcast that they were making. And then we had a sequence of like workshops with them and meetings with them where we basically guided them through their process, and we worked with them. We were in the studio with them when they were recording in the first season, and then now they go to the studio by themselves because they know how to do everything. Same with like the editing and all of that stuff. So for them, that was, I don't know, probably like a quarter of the cost of what it would be if we were producing it completely. And it also gave them like even more control. They had the editorial control and we didn't. We were advising them as consulting producers.
This is a really interesting way of doing it. So I guess my last question to each of you is for any one or two pieces of advice you would have for someone from a charity listening to this who's just got their brain whirring about what this could mean. Could they explore some kind of podcast or at least experiment with it? Could be a completely different type of cause or size of organization. But what have you learned, Adam, in working with various charities that they should do or consider in taking some next steps?
I think they should be genuinely wide open to having a conversation with independent producers, creative people, whether it's me and Tash at Aunt Nell or someone else, and just say, hey, look, can we have a chat? this is our history, this is our organization, and this is maybe some stuff that we've got, like an archive, which they might not even think of as an archive, but believe you me, it probably is. If it's folders and folders of notes of important work that's been going on, then it's an archive. So just be wide open to working with people who are separate to your organization, have their own creative ideas, their own journalistic instincts, their own documentary making impulses, and let them guide you a little bit in how these could be conceived of as stories and how this could be conceived of as a piece of work, in this case, a podcast. You don't lose anything by having that conversation.
Yeah. And even if it doesn't lead to a podcast, probably that creative conversation could just spark up some other idea of how you could look at story differently, couldn't it? And the same question for you, Steph, based on what you've learned and your experience as a fundraiser and a fundraising director, any thoughts that other charities should weigh up?
Yeah, I think if you enter into this process, I think one of the things that Adam touched upon, I think is really key, is you've got to be prepared to kind of let go a little bit and sort of be vulnerable, really, allowing the stories to be told in an authentic way. That really matters, because when you make that choice, you are, for me, I listen to them on the train on my way into work. That's my routine. And I'm making a choice to spend half an hour with someone that I don't really know, that's going to talk to me about something or tell me some stories about something that I want to know a little bit more about. And so there's got to be a reality to that. There's got to feel authentic. And I think that enables people to go on the journey with you. And that's the most important thing, because the medium is so personal in my view. It's not broadcast. I mean, it's out in the world and that loads of people can find it, but when you get it, it's just you getting it. And I think that's what's so powerful about podcasts and the way that it's told, that really makes people own it.
Well, it is a brilliant show. Like Adam says, the stories really do pop, and you feel things and you learn things as each episode goes by. So no wonder it's so successful, in addition to hooray at being great for Switchboard. So thank you for coming along to talk about it and share ideas that might just help some other charities out there. I do really appreciate it. So
thanks, Rob. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
You're very welcome. I love this story. Thanks for sharing generously these ideas and pieces of advice. I guess we can put links in my show notes for people to find both the logbooks and also to find out more about Aunt Nell as well, in case that's a first step some people want to try. But for now, Steph and Adam, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, you.
Rob.
Bye.
So I hope you enjoyed this story. As usual, we'll put a summary in the show notes, which is on the podcast section of our Bright Spot website, and we'll include links to the Logbooks podcast and to Adam's podcast production company, Aunt Nell. Now, I know there's a good chance you've already subscribed to our show, but if not, do click that subscribe button now. You'll immediately get access to dozens more examples and techniques to help you grow your fundraising, and you won't miss out on all the new inspiring stories we've got planned for you over the next few weeks. And if you'd like to find out more about our two long-standing flagship programs, that's the Major Gifts Mastery Program or the Corporate Mastery Program, which have now helped hundreds and hundreds of people to grow fundraising income over the last 10 years. Do check out the information on our website at brightspotfundraising.co.uk/services. Finally, if you found today's show helpful and you think it would help other good causes and charity people, please do spread the word and share it on. Do let us know what you think. We're all on LinkedIn, and on Twitter or X, I am @Woods_Rob, and Adam is @Adam Zmith, and he spells Smith there with a Z, so it's capital ADAM, capital ZMITH. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the Fundraising Bright Spot show. I really do appreciate it. Good luck with all your fundraising and communication, and I look forward to sharing another encouraging Bright Spot story with you very soon.